Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe from Sri Lanka. Can I call you my sister? Minister Sushma Swaraj from India. Of course, my often co-conspirator, Deputy Prime Minister of Vietnam, Pham Binh Minh. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to be here, literally fresh off the plane, and that's why I was a few minutes late. I beg your indulgence. And to be here on the third run of this Indian Ocean Conference, and to be, I remember Prime Minister Ranil, you also have been here on every single conference. I think this illustrates the importance that we ascribe to this topic. Singapore is privileged to be a founding co-partner of the Indian Ocean Conference, which we believe will help shape a common vision for the Indian Ocean and a subject of increasingly vital importance over the years. It helps to start taking a longer-term look back, and in fact, over 3,000 years, the Indian Ocean has been a platform for the exchange of knowledge, culture, religion, and across the enormous diversity of our states. South Asian influences in language and religion born across the waves of the Indian Ocean are clearly evident here in Southeast Asia. Even today, we see the legacy of Sanskrit in our languages, the influence of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam in all our belief systems. The overland Silk Route has been more famous historically, but actually, the Indian Ocean has also been a crucial conduit for maritime trade. The first wave of globalization that was conducted in this part of the world linked the East African coast to the Arabian Peninsula, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and across the South China Sea, obviously to China. And this thriving trade has been chronicled by travelers like Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta in the 13th and 14th century. The Indian Ocean today is even more vital, and it enjoys a privileged location at the crossroads of global trade, connecting the major engines of international economy from all the way from the North Atlantic all the way to the Asia Pacific. I want to emphasize this point called the Maritime Advantage. We live in a time when many people think of connectivity in terms of air, in terms of digital fiber optics, in terms of high-speed rails and overland routes. But it's worthwhile remembering that even today, take the average container ship with a capacity of 20,000 TEUs. If you were to unload that one ship and put each container onto a train, the train that you would need to move the containers from one container ship would be 100 kilometers long. For those of you who are interested in numbers, that's even longer than the Panama Canal. So the point is, even in today's modern day and age, the maritime advantage is still unsurpassed. And there's another reason why the maritime dimension is so important. See, if you take a flight, you've got to traverse air traffic control, you've got to take instructions, you need to seek approvals. On the seas, in the high seas, and even in territorial waters, exercising a right of innocent passage, a ship can go literally anywhere at once in the world. It is point-to-point transport, unrestricted, complete freedom of navigation. And again, this is a key advantage that all the other modalities of transport do not offer us. And it is therefore not a surprise that the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, estimates that 80% of global trade by volume and 70% of its value is transported by sea. And all of us know that a significant, in fact, a preponderance of that traffic actually flows through the Indian Ocean. Just another example, 40% of the world's oil supply travels through the entryways in and out of the Indian Ocean. So there's no question that the Indian Ocean is of strategic, crucial importance to all of us. And one of the central questions of our time, and I think that occupies the minds of this distinguished audience here tonight, is how are we going to address both the opportunities as well as the challenges that will present ourselves in this vital arena. Now, before I go further, let me declare my interest by saying that Singapore is a tiny city-state, a port, which is actually, if you look at the map of the world, we are actually the southernmost tip of the Eurasian continent, which, by the way, is also connected to South Asia and to India. So Singapore is 1 degree 15 minutes north of the equator. If you're going to take a ship from India and you want to go to China, or even if you want to get to the Pacific coast of the United States, the shortest route from the Indian Ocean is through the Straits of Malacca, pivot around Singapore, through the South China Sea, and then the Pacific Ocean. Singapore is also unique because our trade volume is 3 times our GDP. No other political entity has that ratio. Hence, my comments reflect by definition, the perspective of an open trading port that lies at the pivot point of this vital way. So we approach it, and let me share a couple of principles which shape our views of the Indian Ocean, which are in fact drawn also from our experience being at the tip of the Straits of Malacca, and also our more recent experience in the South China Sea. The first thing is that we in Singapore, and indeed I think I can speak on behalf of ASEAN, we believe that we need an open and inclusive regional architecture. And the key words there are open and inclusive architecture. We want to have substantive relations, and we want to remain interconnected with the rest of the world, and as Minister Shushma has said, an interdependent world with mutual investments flowing in all directions. We do not want to be forced to make false choices, and we do not believe that it would be to anyone's benefit for the region to come under the exclusive dominance of any single great power, or maybe just as bad, to be split into rival blocs and to be an arena for proxy wars. Like the countries of the broader Indian Ocean region, ASEAN, as an association of 10 very diverse countries, we will always be affected by what's happening around us. And our short history in the last 5 decades have brought home this point very pointedly. The challenge is whether we allow these external events and the overall strategic change in global balance of power to overwhelm us, to divide us, or whether, in fact, we raft our destinies together and build a more stable raft, or even better still, a maritime-going ship, which will keep us out of danger and at the same time gives us sufficient ballast to withstand the waves and the winds that will come along our way. That's why we have always sought to give everyone a greater stake in our region and a greater stake in mutual interdependence and mutual prosperity. That's why ASEAN has always engaged external parties throughout our history, starting with the post-ministerial conferences with our dialogue partners in 1978, the ASEAN Regional Forum in 1994, the ASEAN +3 in 1997, and the East Asia Summit in 2005. When I meet superpowers, my usual line to them goes like this: it is in your own long-term interests. This is addressed to the superpower. It is in your own long-term interests to see ASEAN succeed. Ultimately, in the decades to come, ASEAN will become your biggest trading partner and will be a greater and more compelling zone for your investments. And the key concept, therefore, is interdependence. And we believe that this is the way to secure the peace and to maintain prosperity in our region by promoting interdependence and to demonstrate to everyone in reality, on the ground, that we gain more by working together and trading with one another and investing in one another rather than engaging in zero-sum games and superpower rivalries. We hope for win-win outcomes. The opposite scenario of being divided into rival blocs and to insist on national independence, engaging in zero-sum competition, and becoming part of proxy wars is not the way for peace and prosperity. So, economic and political interdependence is our mantra. This brings me to my second point today, which is that ASEAN has always sought a regional architecture that articulates a concrete and coherent and consistent economic strategy. In other words, trade is strategy. And we must look for every opportunity to facilitate trade, facilitate mutual investments, and to enhance connectivity and to invest in infrastructure. The global consensus for free trade, for economic integration, actually is fraying. All of us who have to stand for elections, I think many of us in this room have elections coming in the next year or two, will realize that you can no longer stand at a political rally and say you stand for free trade and expect everyone to subscribe to it. The truth is, we live in an age of anxiety, and in a sense, the case for free trade has not been adequately made. In an age when people are worried about competition, are worried about job insecurity, and are worried about inequality, some sectors would see free trade as lowering levels of protection for the most vulnerable, as increasing the prospects of inequality within a society. And therefore, the point here is that politicians who want to make the argument for free trade will have to demonstrate to their domestic electorates that this is a recipe that creates jobs, that maintains economic relevance and competitiveness, and also maintains peace between countries. What I'm saying is that this is actually a political argument, and a political argument that has to be made and decided by domestic electorates. In our case, in the case of Singapore, because, as I said, our trade volume is 3 times our GDP, it's a bit easier for me in Singapore to make the case that we cannot afford to build walls and build protectionist barriers, because Singapore clearly would not be viable in a world without free trade. Nevertheless, we believe that free trade and economic integration has to go beyond Singapore, it has to include ASEAN. And looking beyond ASEAN, now you understand why we are so focused on the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. If we succeed, and we hope to settle this by the end of the year, the RCEP will include all 10 members of ASEAN, plus India, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. This puts together about 45% of the world's population, 30% of the world's GDP. It'll be the single largest free trade zone. In fact, one of the side points I've tried to make is that if we get the RCEP right, and we continue to look and build bridges, economic bridges to Africa, to South America, and across the Pacific, to the US, Mexico, Canada. In effect, we will succeed in the long run, hopefully, possibly, with a free trade area of the Indo-Pacific. And that's why this effort, these difficult negotiations over the next few months are so important. My third point, after economics, is really a rules-based world order. And this again comes from the perspective of a small, tiny city-state. By definition, we cannot believe that might is right. We have to believe in a rules-based world order with multilateral institutions setting multilateral rules and having access to peaceful resolution of disputes. In the maritime field, you will understand therefore why, for us, UNCLOS 1982, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, is such a sacred document. It keeps the sea lanes free, open, peaceful, and allows even small states like Singapore and Sri Lanka to have a say, an equal say, even when we are dealing with much bigger political and economic entities. So let me conclude by making the point that the Indian Ocean has always been a vital artery for peace and prosperity. It has become even more so now. The maritime dimension has always been important, and even in this modern day and age, perhaps even more important. And we need these three ingredients: free and open regional and international architecture. We need to have a clear economic agenda, and we need to have a rules-based world order. If we can do this, then we believe the Indian Ocean will be another cradle for a new burst of energy, a new golden age for all the countries, big and small, represented here. Thank you all very much.